The perfect facade. The morning sun streamed through the silk curtains of the bridal suite at Ocean View Manor, casting a golden glow across Emma Chen's reflection in the antique mirror. At 28, she had built a reputation as one of the city's most promising architectural designers, but today she felt like a princess stepping into her own fairy tale. Her wedding dress, a masterpiece of French lace and hand-sewn pearls, had cost more than most people's cars, but seeing the way it hugged her petite frame perfectly made every penny worth it. "You look absolutely radiant," whispered her best friend, Riley, adjusting the cathedral-length veil with practiced precision. Riley had been Emma's roommate at Northwestern University, and their friendship had weathered 7 years of career changes, relationship drama, and countless late-night conversations over wine and takeout. With her striking auburn hair and emerald eyes, Riley had always been the one who turned heads when they walked into a room together. But today, she seemed content to fade into the background, focusing entirely on making Emma's day perfect. The Ocean View Manor had been booked solid for the next 2 years, but Marcus had somehow managed to secure their dream venue through his extensive business connections. As a successful tech entrepreneur who had sold his first startup at 26, Marcus Rivera possessed the kind of charm and confidence that made everything seem possible. His deep brown eyes and infectious smile had captivated Emma from their very first meeting at a networking event 18 months ago, and his proposal on the beach at sunset had been everything she'd ever dreamed of. The ceremony space overlooked the Pacific Ocean, where 180 of their closest friends and family members were already gathering on the pristine white chairs arranged in perfect rows. Emma's parents, both successful doctors, had insisted on sparing no expense for their only daughter's wedding. The florals alone, cascading arrangements of white orchids, garden roses, and eucalyptus, had cost $15,000, but the effect was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the outdoor pavilion, and soft jazz music drifted through the air as guests found their seats. "Your parents look so proud," Riley observed, nodding toward where Emma's mother was tearfully embracing relatives who had flown in from across the country. "And Marcus's family seems wonderful too. His sister was just telling me how excited they are to officially welcome you into the family." Emma felt her heart skip as she caught sight of Marcus through the window, looking devastatingly handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo as he greeted guests with that megawatt smile. He moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who had never met a stranger, shaking hands with her father's business partners and charming her elderly aunts with equal skill. This was the man who had swept her off her feet with weekend trips to Napa Valley, surprise concerts by her favorite artists, and a proposal so romantic it had gone viral on social media. The ceremony itself unfolded like a dream. Emma's father walked her down the petal-strewn aisle while Marcus watched with tears in his eyes, and their vows brought not a dry eye to the entire gathering. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause as Marcus dipped Emma into a kiss that would grace the cover of their wedding album. The reception that followed was equally magical. The couple's first dance to "The Way You Look Tonight" had guests reaching for their tissues, and the 7-course dinner prepared by the Manor's award-winning chef exceeded everyone's expectations. Emma moved through the evening in a haze of joy, accepting congratulations and posing for what felt like thousands of photos with their photographer. But as the evening wore on, she began to notice small things that didn't quite fit. Marcus kept checking his phone during toasts, stepping away for hushed phone calls, and disappearing for longer and longer periods. When she asked about it, he brushed off her concerns with quick kisses and promises that nothing could be more important than celebrating with her. "Everything okay?" Riley asked during a quiet moment as they watched guests dancing to the live band they'd hired from Los Angeles. "I think so," Emma replied, though something in her chest had begun to tighten, with an anxiety she couldn't quite name. The vanishing act, the first sign that something was seriously wrong, came during the cake-cutting ceremony. Emma stood alone beside their three-tiered masterpiece, vanilla bean cake with raspberry filling that had required a tasting session with 5 different bakers. While the photographer waited with his camera poised, the guests had gathered in a semicircle, champagne flutes raised and phones recording, but the groom was nowhere to be found. Where did Marcus go? Emma's mother, Dr. Patricia Chen, approached with a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The photographer needs to capture this moment while the lighting is still perfect. Emma's stomach began to knot as she scanned the reception hall. She had last seen her husband 20 minutes ago, accepting congratulations from his college fraternity. Brothers near the bar. "I'm sure he's just taking a call," she said, though her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. "You know how his investors can be. They don't respect boundaries, even on weekends." Riley appeared at Emma's elbow, her bridesmaid dress a soft blush pink that complemented her auburn hair. "I'll find him," she offered quickly. Perhaps too quickly. He probably stepped outside for some air. You know how overwhelming these events can be, even when they're celebrating you. But Riley returned 20 minutes later, shaking her head with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. "Security said they saw him heading toward the parking garage, but his Tesla is still there. Maybe he went for a walk on the beach?" The minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Emma found herself making increasingly desperate excuses to their guests, who had begun to give her those pitying looks that made her skin crawl. Her great-aunt Rosemary, never one to mince words, patted Emma's hand with barely concealed sympathy. "In my day, men didn't just disappear from their own weddings, dear. Something's not right about this." Emma's father, Dr. James Chen, had mobilized into protective mode, dispatching Emma's male cousins to search every corner of the sprawling manor grounds. They combed through the gardens, checked the wine cellar, even looked in the kitchen where the catering staff was cleaning up from dinner service. Marcus had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. "Maybe there's been an emergency," suggested Emma's college friend Jessica, though her voice lacked conviction. "A family member could be sick, or there might have been an accident. Has anyone tried calling his parents?" But Marcus's parents were just as bewildered as everyone else. His mother, Elena Rivera, kept wringing her hands and repeating, "This isn't like him at all. Marcus would never just leave without saying something. There has to be an explanation." By hour 3, the reception hall had emptied considerably. The older relatives had departed with uncomfortable goodbyes. The out-of-town guests had retreated to their hotel rooms, and only the most loyal friends remained, nursing their drinks and speaking in hushed tones. The live band had packed up their instruments, and the elaborate floral arrangement suddenly seemed garish under the harsh overhead lights that had replaced the romantic ambiance. Emma's wedding dress, which had felt like armor that morning, now felt like a costume from a play that had ended badly. The beading that had sparkled so beautifully in the ceremony photos now caught the light in ways that seemed almost mocking. She had imagined this dress being carefully preserved for her future daughter, not worn during the most humiliating night of her life. "Honey, why don't we go back to the bridal suite?" her mother suggested gently. "You can change out of your dress and we can figure out what to do next. There's no point in torturing yourself by staying here." But Emma couldn't bring herself to leave. Some stubborn part of her kept believing that Marcus would walk through those doors with a reasonable explanation that would make all of this make sense. Maybe his phone had died, and he'd been dealing with a family crisis. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding, a miscommunication that could be resolved with a simple conversation. Riley had been unusually quiet during the search, offering to help, but always seeming to return empty-handed from her efforts. When Emma looked at her oldest friend now, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A tension around Riley's eyes, a way of avoiding direct eye contact that felt almost guilty. "Riley," Emma said slowly, "you don't think he's just gotten cold feet, do you? I mean, we've been planning this for 8 months. We put deposits down on a honeymoon suite. We've got flights to Santorini tomorrow morning." "I don't know what to think," Riley replied, but something in her voice made Emma's blood run cold. It was the same tone Riley had used in college when she was hiding something, when she'd broken Emma's favorite lamp and tried to cover it up, when she'd kissed Emma's boyfriend at a party and spent weeks avoiding the subject. The realization hit Emma like a physical blow. The honeymoon suite. They had booked the penthouse at the Manor for their wedding night, a romantic gesture that had seemed perfect when they'd toured the space months ago. If Marcus was anywhere, if he was hiding or planning some kind of surprise or dealing with whatever crisis had pulled him away from their reception, he would be there. Emma looked around the nearly empty reception hall one more time, at the wilted flowers and the abandoned cake and the few remaining guests who were pretending not to stare at her with pity, and made her decision. Part 3. The Devastating Discovery. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like ascending to her own execution. Emma's hands trembled as she clutched the keycard the Manor's event coordinator had discreetly provided, her wedding dress rustling with each nervous shift of her weight. The mirrored walls reflected her image back from every angle. A bride who looked like she was heading to a funeral instead of her honeymoon suite. "Maybe I should come with you," Riley had offered when Emma announced her intention to check the penthouse, but something in her friend's expression had seemed almost panicked. "You shouldn't have to face whatever's up there alone." "No," Emma had replied firmly, though she couldn't explain the instinct that told her this was something she needed to do by herself. "If he's up there, if there's some explanation for all this, it should be between Marcus and me." The hallway on the 20th floor was eerily quiet, thick carpet muffling the sound of her heels as she approached the double doors of the penthouse. "Sweet." She paused for a moment, pressing her ear to the door, and felt her heart stop at what she heard. Voices, low and intimate, coming from inside the room that was supposed to be theirs alone tonight. Emma's hands shook so badly she could barely manage to slide the keycard through the reader. But finally, the lock clicked open and she pushed the door open slowly. The suite was dimly lit by candles that someone had arranged throughout the space. The same vanilla-scented candles she had specifically requested for their wedding night. Rose petals were scattered across the marble floor, leading toward the bedroom, and soft jazz music played from the sound system. For one confused moment, Emma wondered if this was all part of some elaborate surprise Marcus had planned. Maybe he had arranged this romantic setting and was waiting for her with an explanation that would make everything make sense. But then she heard the sounds coming from the bedroom, breathless whispers and movement that spoke of an intimacy that made her stomach turn. She followed the trail of rose petals, her $3,000 designer heels clicking against the marble with each step. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and what she saw through the gap destroyed every assumption she had ever made about her life. Marcus was there, just as she had hoped and feared he would be, but he wasn't alone, and he wasn't waiting for her. He was with Riley, and they were tangled together in the king-sized bed that had been prepared for Emma's wedding night. Riley's blush-pink bridesmaid dress was crumpled on the floor beside Marcus's tuxedo, and their movements together spoke of a familiarity that could only come from months of practice. Emma must have made some sound, a gasp, a whimper, something, because they both froze and turned toward the door. Marcus's face went white as he scrambled to pull the silk sheets around himself, but Riley's reaction was completely different. Instead of shame or surprise, Emma saw something that looked almost like relief cross her best friend's features. "Emma," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "This isn't, I can explain. This is not what it looks like." But Riley sat up slowly, making no effort to cover herself, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and cold. "Actually, Emma, it's exactly what it looks like. We've been together for 10 months now." She paused, tilting her head with an expression that was almost sympathetic. "He never really loved you, you know. Your trust fund and your father's business connections were always more appealing than you were." The words hit Emma like physical blows, each revelation more devastating than the last. 10 months. That meant their affair had started just 2 months after Emma and Marcus had gotten engaged. It meant that every planning session for the wedding, every excited conversation about their future, every intimate moment she had shared with Marcus had been built on lies. "Riley," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "You were my maid of honor. You helped me pick out my dress. You threw me a bridal shower. How could you?" The calculated response. Emma's transformation began in the elevator on the way back down to the reception hall. By the time the doors opened on the main floor, the heartbroken bride had been replaced by someone harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. She had spent 5 years building a successful architectural design firm by being strategic and analytical. And now she would apply those same skills to dismantling the life of the man who had destroyed hers. The remaining wedding guests fell silent as she emerged from the elevator, still in her wedding dress, but with something fundamentally different about her bearing. Her father approached cautiously, his protective instincts clearly on high alert. "Emma, sweetheart, what happened? Did you find him?" "I found him," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying across the nearly empty reception hall with surprising steadiness. "And I found out everything I needed to know about my marriage." She looked around at the faces of the people who had stayed, her family, Marcus's bewildered parents, a handful of close friends who had refused to abandon her in her hour of need. "The wedding is over. Marcus won't be joining us for the remainder of the evening." Her father's face darkened with understanding. "What did he do?" "That's between Marcus and me," Emma replied, but her tone left no doubt that whatever had happened upstairs was unforgivable. "But I want everyone to know that I appreciate you staying, and I won't forget who was here when it mattered." Over the next hour, as the last guest departed and the manor staff began cleaning up the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of her life, Emma began making phone calls. Her first call was to her lawyer, David Kim, who had handled the contracts for her business and had always impressed her with his thoroughness and discretion. "David, I need you to meet me tomorrow morning," she said, stepping out onto the terrace where she could speak privately. "I need to understand exactly what legal rights I have regarding assets that were shared before my marriage was consummated." Her second call was to her accountant, Margaret Torres, who had helped her structure her business finances and had always warned her about the importance of keeping detailed records. "Margaret, I need you to pull together every financial document related to any money I've given or lent to Marcus Rivera over the past 18 months. Every investment, every loan, every expense I covered for his business ventures. I want a complete accounting by Monday morning." The third call was the most difficult. She dialed her business partner, Nathan Wu, who she knew would be shocked to hear from her on her wedding night. "Nathan, I need you to contact our clients who have been working with Marcus's development company, especially the Chen Medical Center project and the Harbor Point residential complex. I have some information they're going to want to hear." By Monday morning, Emma had assembled a war chest of information that painted a devastating picture of Marcus's business practices. It turned out that his successful development company was built on a foundation of lies and barely legal financial maneuvering. The startup he had supposedly sold for millions had actually been dissolved after a series of lawsuits, and his current projects were funded entirely by money he had borrowed from Emma and her family connections. The Chen Medical Center project, which Emma's father had personally recommended to several of his colleagues, was 3 months behind schedule and over budget due to Marcus's habit of using funds meant for construction to cover his personal expenses and finance his lavish lifestyle. The Harbor Point residential complex, which had been marketed as luxury condominiums with ocean views, was being built with substandard materials while buyers were being charged premium prices. Emma's revenge was swift and surgical. She used her own professional reputation and her family's extensive network to ensure that every client, investor, and business partner Marcus had ever worked with learned the truth about his practices. She provided David with detailed financial records that proved Marcus had used her money to pay for everything from his car payments to his expensive dinners with Riley, technically making him guilty of fraud. The local business journal published a scathing exposé about Marcus's company within a week, complete with interviews from former employees who described a pattern of financial mismanagement and ethical violations. The state licensing board opened an investigation into his development projects, and 3 major clients pulled their contracts within days of the article's publication. But Emma's masterstroke was her handling of the Harbor Point project. Using her architectural expertise and her connections in the construction industry, she was able to document that the building Marcus was constructing did not meet the specifications that buyers had been promised. When she presented this information to the buyers, many of whom were young families who had invested their life savings in what they believed would be their dream homes, they filed a class action lawsuit that effectively froze all of Marcus's assets. Within 3 weeks of her wedding day, Marcus's company had collapsed entirely. His business partners had distanced themselves, his creditors were circling, and his reputation in the development community was destroyed. Emma had methodically dismantled everything he had built, using the same attention to detail and strategic thinking that had made her own business successful. The final blow came when Emma's lawyer discovered that Marcus had been planning to divorce her immediately after their honeymoon, keeping half of any assets they had accumulated during their brief marriage while walking away from the debts his company had incurred. David was able to prove that the marriage had been entered into under fraudulent pretenses, which meant that Emma had no financial responsibility for Marcus's business failures. "He used you," David explained during one of their meetings, his voice filled with disgust. "The whole relationship was a con game designed to give him access to your money and your family's connections. If you hadn't discovered the affair when you did, he would have bled you dry and then disappeared." Emma felt no satisfaction in Marcus's destruction, only a cold sense of justice. She had trusted completely and been betrayed absolutely, but she had refused to be a victim. Instead, she had turned her pain into power and used it to ensure that Marcus would never be able to hurt anyone else the way he had hurt her. Part 5. Rising from the Ashes. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Emma stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office space, watching the morning sun paint the city skyline in shades of gold and amber. The view from the 32nd floor was spectacular, a far cry from the cramped space she had rented when she first started her architectural firm 5 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her that Marcus's betrayal had ultimately been the catalyst for the biggest professional leap of her career. "The Yamamoto project proposals just arrived," announced her new business partner, Grace Liu, bustling into the office with her arms full of presentation boards. Grace was everything Riley had never been: brilliant, trustworthy, and completely dedicated to building something meaningful together. They had met at a professional development conference just 2 months after Emma's wedding disaster, and there, Partnership had evolved naturally from mutual respect to genuine friendship. "Perfect timing," Emma replied, turning away from the window with a smile that felt genuine for the first time in months. "I spent all weekend reviewing their sustainability requirements. This project could set a new standard for green architecture in the Pacific Northwest." The Chen Liu Architecture Group had grown faster than either woman had dared to hope. Emma had used the money she had recovered from Marcus's failed ventures, along with a substantial loan from her parents, who were determined to see their daughter thrive, to expand her business and hire the best talent in the industry. The firm now employed 15 people and had a waiting list of clients who wanted to work with the team that had been featured on the cover of Architectural Digest for their innovative approach to sustainable design. Emma had also used her experience with Marcus's fraudulent building practices to become an expert in construction, oversight, and ethics consulting. She now regularly spoke at industry conferences about how to identify and prevent the kind of financial manipulation that had nearly destroyed her trust in people. Her presentations were always packed, partly because of her professional expertise, and partly because word had spread about the spectacular way she had handled her personal betrayal. "You know," Grace said, setting down the presentation materials and studying Emma's face, "you look different lately, more relaxed. Have you been sleeping better?" Emma considered the question seriously. For months after the wedding, she had barely slept, her mind constantly racing through the details of Marcus's deception and the legal proceedings that had followed. She had lost 15 pounds and developed a nervous habit of checking and rechecking locks and security systems, unable to trust that anyone was really who they claimed to be.